What's up?
What's up?
Just adjusting your volume now that you're the only person on the call.
Right? It's always the weirdest thing.
Just understand why I have to adjust it.
Adjust, 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 adjust. Adjust.
I
You
think
adjusted yet?
I think that's good.
Alright. Alright.
All right, geekity geek.
Trying to remember if I had anything saved for this week.
Um. Yep.
Right? Looks like the only thing I had saved is from comingsoon.net.
Oh, sorry.
Wrong coming soon. Was just that I think someone asked James Gunn on Twitter how much Tom King has a hand in developing. Let's see, what was it, Supergirl, and the rest
Yeah.
of the DCU stuff going forward. And James just said that he's an integral part because it also sounds like Supergirl that they're doing is Tom King's Supergirl.
Superwoman, or yeah, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, I believe is the one they're adapting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. He was. I don't remember if it was last year. I could try to find it, but he tweets a lot. So, but it was like either last year or year before. He mentioned how he was in the writers' room and he couldn't talk about for an upcoming project. And that could be a lot of things because he has done screenwriting stuff before, but it just makes sense because it falls in time with what we know of the DCU coming forward. Because people often forget that it wasn't like an overnight thing where they decided to give James control. Well, James and Peter. It wasn't things like they just like, oh, hey, by the way, here you go. It's not how this works. But also, we have to remember that it's been almost a year now since we heard about them taking over.
Mm-hmm.
So, actually, it might be more than a year now, but then almost a year from when James dropped that video, which was like January of something last year. So, you know, it's not like it's you know, a new thing, and there's a lot going on, obviously, but we'll see.
Definitely.
But yeah, no, I mean, even because I can't remember what it was, but people have been asking Tom for a while now if he has any input into the adaptation of it, because it's literally that was the book that James referenced that they are making this, and I was like, well, it's a bold choice, but excellent choice. It's a great book. So yeah, so it should be interesting. But yeah, it's they haven't announced fully yet everybody who's involved in these things, but so far, James and Peter are doing a pretty good job so far of lining things up. From the little we know so far, at least. Hopefully, Andy, who is taking reins of the Batman Brave and the Bold, gets a little more creative freedom and help with his Batman movie versus the Flash movie. Not saying the Flash movie is not good. There's some things in it that are fun. Overall, not great. Especially CG. Hopefully, with Batman, they don't need a whole lot of CG. Because if you look at the the difference in quality of the CG from, like, say, I don't know, It Chapter 1 and 2, and The Flash, there's a giant difference in quality.
Right.
But we look back, and I'm not taking a dump on DC here, but DC does not have the greatest track record when it comes to CG in their movies.
Yeah, there's some wonky stuff in some of them.
Yeah, so if you look at, like, I don't know, we'll just use an example. Justice League, the original version, not the re-released
Not the
Snyder
Snyder
cut.
cut.
There's some real bad CG in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the mustache thing. I'm talking about like the animation of Superman in the slow mo scene. It was not good, not good. But yeah, it's so we'll see how it plays out. But hopefully they get a little more, I don't know, better with it. But we'll see how it works.
Speaking of CG, there was something I was wondering last night because it came up that was something I was watching that Warner Brothers and somebody else were looking to combine. I don't remember who was looking to buy out who. It was probably Warner Bros. Was looking to buy out the other company. But it occurred to me, why? I wonder why the big studios don't just buy and have their own CG companies. It's kind of a weird thing to me because you do hear, like Weta is a big company, but a lot of these companies will pop up just for like a certain project, and then they basically go away afterwards. And I've always wondered why. It started making me wonder why, like Warner's doesn't just have their own. This is our CG people. We trust them. They've made tons of stuff for us. This is our go-to department for making anything CG.
It is strange because even like Disney, who is everyone's favorite big company to yell at when they buy things, they still use independent animation houses,
Mm-hmm.
even though they have their own studio, literally Walt Disney Animation Studios. They own Pixar, which Pixar does all their own thing anyway, so it's not like they're doing stuff for other things. It's just Pixar. But they still use independent animation companies for some things, for mass stuff, even stuff done under their own umbrella. Not so much their movies. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'd have to look at some of the credits, but I'm pretty sure when it's a Disney Animated Studios movie, it's majority of it is animated in house. But I do know they do a lot of outside stuff for like rendering of stuff. Like, hey, this is it. Render, like, do your thing. We've done all the hard part. Just go here or whatever. And they do a lot of contract work, but a lot of that is like for like design elements and stuff like that. It's not like they're saying, hey, here's our scripts, go animate and we'll get it back here. That sort of thing. But I don't have an answer, but I do know someone had brought this up before somewhere, and it comes down to the fact that like the studios don't want to spend money on in-house due to the fact that there could always be better animators available. Versus if you have a staple of people, I'm not saying only, but they might have a specialty that's only certain things. You know what I mean? Like they're good at CG for fantasy, or they're CG for cyberpunk, or whatever happens to be like that's their aesthetic. And instead of having a stable of a bunch of different CG artists, you could say, hey, this company's good at this, humanoid replication of existing people or whatever, versus this company's really good with cartoony animation and CG work, that sort of thing. And it also comes down to the fact that they can contract out for the lowest bidder a lot of times, which shows. But if you, to your point, you would think that you'd want to leave it in house so you have a more control and more stability with what your CG is.
Exactly.
And there's a company that was just one of the dudes was just on Corridor Crew for one of the episodes, and his company, which name escapes me. Actually, I think I followed him on YouTube because they do some fun little stuff. This is not going to show newer stuff, huh? Nah, that was a bad choice to even try to look that up. I can't remember what it was called. That's my mistake. I'll post about it. I think on the site. I can't remember what it was. But their previs. Did you watch that episode? The previs episode.
I probably have. I just don't remember it. You'd have to explain more about the episode.
So they were talking about pre-visualization CG work when they were doing the prep.
Okay, Now I remember. Yeah.
It was just last week, I think it was.
Yeah, I remember that. Watching it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like they work, and obviously it's different than CG because the guy was on the episode was talking about working on Prey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And showing like the animatics beforehand and how they work with the companies, and he dropped Trachtenberg's name,
Right.
and how they basically help visualize and prep things for like obviously getting money from producers, but also just concept stuff going forward. But there's a lot of those places too, like where they don't have exclusive contracts with companies. They're just that's their business. Is companies come to them and say, hey, we have this project, we would like to hire you for the CG work on this and this. And again, it's a lot of those places, they specialize in mocap versus fully CG rendered characters, or a combination of both, or whatever it happens to be. So instead of having to have in to I don't know, this is the same point that they were bringing up, is not just having a specialized group of people just for mocap work, motion capture work, and full CG stuff and lighting effects and all these different things. You have a choice you can go through, and like when you watch the end of like Avengers movies and shit, like Marvel movies, you'll see so many different CG companies that are just like boom, boom, boom. And I'm not gonna remember them all, which is unfair, but I'm also not making movies, so I don't have to remember who they are. But when you go look, and
how many of those companies are still in business too? A lot of these, and this is a generalization, but I know that a lot of them will, like I said, spin up for a project, but because they basically underbid themselves so much, the company doesn't last afterwards.
Well, I'm sure it happens all the time for that stuff, but
so that's why kind of getting at it, like wondering why you don't just have a certain set of animators in house that do a lot of stuff.
I mean, a lot of it,
know what their quality is, and whatnot.
And like I said, I don't have an exact answer. I'm guessing that's probably what it is the fact that you might be able to get it done cheaper by letting it being bid out by these different companies, which sucks because then you're going away from all control at that point. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously there's a lot of costs behind it that we don't know. Because once you absorb those, you have to basically pay those employees a working wage, and things like health insurance and all these other things that you have to when you own and pay for people's livelihoods. What's crazy though is you would think they'd want more of this, only for the fact that the turnaround time would probably be better. But also, they're cranking out so much stuff that they probably have to utilize a lot of other companies for certain things. But you would think, just a broad idea, you'd think the bulk of your work would be done by the in-house people, and then you'd ship it off to be polished off, or background bullshit added in by these other companies.
Like in-house is all the main stuff, and all the other stuff that isn't main stuff gets shipped off to another company to do like background scenes and stuff like that.
You would think, but who knows if that's an idea or not. But yeah, I know what you're saying, and I've often thought that, because even when you go watch some of these bigger movies, and I'm not talking about like Disney movies or Disney umbrella movies, Marvel and Star Wars, but like when you look at like a lot of these movies that have like I can't think of a perfect example, but you look at a movie that has like a Denzel Washington in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Denzel Washington, you think pretty big draw for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much probably The Equalizer, because after the first one, the quality of those movies dropped. Well, I say quality of movies. I haven't seen the third one, but after the distaste I found in the second one, I definitely didn't rush out to see the third one. But when you see these and then the movie starts and you have your opening credit things and there's like 5 different production companies making this movie, you got to think to yourself, A, there's something wrong with this whole thing because it shouldn't take that many companies to come together to make something with Denzel fucking Washington in it.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it happens. It's not just I'm not picking on Denzel. I'm just saying someone like Denzel's stature should probably draw in enough, money. But then these companies say, "Hey, we have this project with Denzel Washington. Y'all want to come in?" And like then they just share the money. But it's like then you also have to share the profits.
Right.
So I don't know. It's weird to me, but it's always been a thing where like
But it also is just as surprising to me. Like another flip side of the coin on this thought process too is you have these big companies that have to hire out multiple uh, uh, animation companies, and to your point as well, multiple production companies in order to get one film made. But then it still blows my mind when you have somebody like Neil Blomkamp, who basically does a lot of this stuff in house with all of his own stuff, and he can release movies that are just visually stunning and have great CG in them. And yet I don't understand. I guess the bulk of the argument is I just don't understand how big budget films in these cases don't look as good as something that was quote unquote be a smaller budget film.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it also comes down to the fact that like Neil's an artist. You know what I mean? Like he is. If you wanted to try to say, hey, name an auteur that is a master of his craft, storytelling, visual storytelling, all that fun stuff, I would definitely say Neil is up there above a lot of other people because he does have this overall passion for it, and he has his toes in video games now, obviously movies. He makes major studio projects like Gran Turismo and shit like that, but then he makes his projects, and he even has an independent his own studios with Oates, that like they make little crazy short films which are just mind-blowing at many points. Not just they're telling stories in 10-15 minutes that most movies can't get across in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And obviously the CG is cheaper for a 15-minute project versus an hour and 30-minute project, but I would say the graphics and the special effects in like a District 9 are far beyond some of the stuff you see come out of the bigger studios.
Yeah.
And that was like obviously Neil's like earliest, like his first feature film, like of his own. He's worked on several things obviously before that, not just Stargate. But and you look at that and you're like, he made fully CG'd motion captured creatures that for the most part look real. Like they are, and I'd have to watch it again, but there's probably some stuff, and even in what was the robot Chappie?
Yeah.
Like that shit was wild.
Yeah.
Like that's like, did y'all build like a robot?
Right.
No, that's our boy Sharto in a fucking motion capture suit. That's pretty good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Elysium was dope. Like the that was, and a lot of his stuff is very minimalist when it comes to some CG stuff. Obviously, he's not creating the whole CG backgrounds and shit, but they're deleting stuff. They're making things. Like District 9, for example. The entire time in that movie, there's a giant ship just looming over everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that shit's wild. Like you have to comp that in, like every shot, and it has to be consistent. Like that's wild to me. And then you have all those interaction of all the different creatures and aliens that are interacting, and then like even like the CG work on Sharto as he's transforming into one of these creatures is fucking wild.
Yeah.
With one big eye and all sorts of shit. You know, a lot of it's in makeup, but obviously the big eyeball is not makeup; it's CG. You know, but yeah, it's wild to me, and it's also weird. And we've talked about this before, is how Neil keeps getting shit on for major projects.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. I mean, we obviously don't know all the politics behind it, whatever, right? But like, for example, his Alien.
Right.
Like, from what we heard, and there's probably more detail about it, we haven't found out. But like, everyone was like on board, and then like they decided, nah, we want to go a different direction. Bye.
Yeah.
And like he has full on concept art, you know, like all these different things, and it's like,
He had Sigourney Weaver on board.
yeah, dude, like it's crazy to me, and it's like this dude keeps making these movies, and they're not, a lot of them aren't blockbusters, but like they're for the most part in their genre, whatever you want to fall them into, they're stupendous sci-fi works.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not for everybody, you realize, but sci-fi is not for everyone.
No.
Sci-fi is never going to be a fucking giant thing. And obviously District 9 helped catapult him into the spotlight. I mean, obviously that's where we discovered him.
Yep.
You know, we didn't know who he was before District 9. But I mean, that obviously cost him very little for what it was, and then made a boatload of money comparative. And obviously got his name out there, not just to like two random people or a group of friends, but like obviously his name is well known within the industry and by fans and stuff like that. But it's crazy to me when you look at this and you're like, why aren't you giving this guy more opportunity?
Right.
It's like, bro, this guy comes out and he does these things that are arguably one of the like most artistically made and passionate movies that you can think of, that are just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you giving him some of these sci-fi fucking franchises, or just a shot at them? You know what I mean? Like, what's the difference? Like, I just don't understand. Like, and it's the same thing as when you look at like, and not to go away from Neil, but like when you look at people like the two dudes that made Saw, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have James Wan and you have Lee Winnell, and these dudes created this franchise that is widely popular out of a fucking short film out of college.
Mm-hmm.
That has obviously sprouted into things, and obviously James has gone on to do a buttload of stuff, and he's an even wildness that he wants to do the Call of Cthulhu as one of his next projects. That's fucking nuts, just right there. Because like, how do you boil that down into a fucking movie of anything?
Yeah, that's gonna be hard.
You know. And then Lee has had his own run of success. Not that a lot of people know, but like, for example, we love the movie called Upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of his. The newer Invisible Man, that new adaptation they made, that's his. He's done a lot of things, and those are the ones that pop on top of my head. But like, obviously, like the Saw franchise, he was highly involved in that for a long time. It went a little off the rails, but that's what happens when the franchises and studios get a hold of it. They're just like, let's rush them out.
Right. And
but like,
speaks to the fact that it seems like studios every once in a while want to take a chance on something, and so they do without much expectations of it. But then once it becomes popular, they latch onto it, and just drive it into the ground.
Yeah, instead of actually working on it and making it something special, they're like, we can
Let's
pump
just
these
pump
out.
these out every year because this is our Halloween movie. Not the movie Halloween, but like it's a scary movie that we can pump out every year.
Yeah, exactly.
Type thing. Yeah.
Like, I just pulled up Lee Winnell's work, for example. His movies. So Saw, like we mentioned earlier, he wrote Saw 1, 2, and 3. He wrote Dead Silence, that puppet movie.
Okay.
He wrote Insidious chapters 1 and 2. The movie Cooties, if you remember that movie or not, with Elijah Wood. It's the
I haven't seen it, but I think I remember it.
zombie movie set in an elementary school.
Yeah.
It's a horror comedy. It's a fantastic movie. He wrote and directed Insidious Chapter 3. Wrote Insidious The Last Key. Wrote and directed Upgrade. Wrote and directed Invisible Man. and then he did story elements for the last Insidious movie. So those are just like, that's just his career spawning off of a short film he co-wrote with James Wan back in 2003. So in 20 years, he's made some of the largest dents in the modern horror that you can imagine. And like, he's even directed some of them. But then like, you have sci-fi gems like Upgrade in there. Like, it's wild to me that, like, you know, like, that's what he does. But he's one of those dudes where, like, he's not really like, I don't know for a fact, I don't know him, and I don't know his story, but it doesn't seem like with all the success he's had, they're not just throwing shit left and right at him. You know, it's crazy. Also, he shows up in a lot of his movies, which makes me laugh, because he'll pop up and like, he'll even kill himself in movies. It's hilarious.
That's a very Wes Craven, Wes Anderson, no, Wes Craven.
Wes Craven,
yeah, thing to do.
So yeah, so it's crazy to me. It's just like, you know, that's one of the things, and he's obviously done a lot of things in his life that aren't just those, but like, he's right now he's working on the reboot of Escape from New York, I believe.
Okay.
He also is, I want to say he's in talks for the new Green Hornet movie too, if I remember correctly.
Interesting.
I don't quote me on that, but I think those are the ones I saw him being involved with. But then again, we hear about that shit all the time. It never happens, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it's just wild that's like, for example, like, those two dudes, their careers obviously are drastically different. And one went to making giant blockbuster movies, and arguably some of the worst movies, like that fucking what was that fucking movie James Wan made? I don't think he wrote it. Did he direct it too? I can't remember. It's that fucking one where the girl had her twin brother, like, in her body. It just came out recently. What was it called?
Twin brother in her body.
It's a spoiler if you haven't seen it.
Obviously, I haven't seen it.
God damn it. What's it called? It has a weird fucking name. I'll have to look it up now. Hold on.
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
have to know more about the plot in order to understand it.
so there's like this killer who's like killing people that are like linked to this girl, this lady, and like they think it's her, like, in disguise and all this stuff, and then it turns out that, like, in some freak fucking surgery thing, when her and her conjoined brother were like whatever, they were like, they did something where like he like basically lived on in her as like a tumor, and like he and her wound into her brain and shit so he could take over. So at night when she goes to sleep, he takes over in like the body, but his face comes out the back of her head, and then he works her body backwards. So when they're like running, it looks all weird because he's running backwards but forward for him. It's very strange. Hold on.
Nope, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I don't think you saw it.
The strangest things ever.
Yeah, it's not a good movie. When they reveal it, I was like, well, this was a waste of my time and money.
Like, I can't even think of a trailer that I've seen that would have included some of those elements in it.
Malignant.
Oh, I think I have heard of that.
Yeah, it was, like, you know, like me, I love horror movies, so I'll see a lot of garbage horror movies.
Yeah.
And I was kind of excited about this because James Wan, and he's done some pretty fun stuff. And I was like kind of dubious when I saw the trailer. I was like, it just seems, I don't know, whatever. And then I saw it and I was like, why do I keep watching these fucking movies? And everyone's like, oh, it's so good. I'm like, how the fuck and you people think this is good? It is fucking terrible.
These movies because you want to have that good horror feeling again.
It's true.
Yeah.
And then they get me when they watch something like Megan, and I'm like, yo, did y'all even work on this, or did you just throw some shit at the fucking wall and just make it stick? Because you could have done so much more with this. Instead, you made essentially a lady version of the newer Child's Play movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a AI toy that goes berserk and starts murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is you didn't have Mark Hamill voicing the fucking toy. you know, and it's like, oh, dude, bro, why? I mean, he has his hand in like a lot of the fucking major horror movies that come out lately. I mean, obviously, all of the stuff that's in the Conjuring universe, so Conjuring, The Nun, Annabelle. I think that's all of them, right? Yeah, and yeah, I mean, obviously, then he does like Aquaman, which is wild to me.
Still had some horror elements in it.
It's true, which I really wish they would have done the second one that way, but
the trench, yeah,
that shit was fucking wild, dude. That was terrifying. Yeah, because he has other projects. He's producer on Salem's Lot, the remake. Obviously, he's making the Mortal Kombat producing the Mortal Kombat movies, the newer ones. Oh, he directed an episode of the MacGyver show, the new one. I didn't know that.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, I knew he was a producer on it, but I didn't realize he directed an episode. The Rising is what it's called. I wonder if it has horror elements in it.
Right.
What the fuck is Samurai Rabbit, the Usagi Chronicles? There's a... What?
Well, I mean...
Wait,
based
what?
on that alone, Usagi Yojimbo?
Yeah, they made an animated show on Netflix.
That's news to me.
What the fuck? When the hell did that come out?
Right?
August of this year? What the hell?
Another reason why I hate Netflix, man. They will just throw shit on there and you will not know that...
Bro, it has two whole seasons.
Something came out.
It has 2 seasons, 20 episodes.
That sounds like something that would have been right up our alley.
What the fuck? I didn't realize that. That's wild.
Right?
Oh, he's executive producing the new Gargoyles show.
That's cool. That's something right up his alley too.
Yeah. All right. That's cool. Anyways, yeah. So we got on a weird tangent there. But it just comes down to the fact that like it's weird when studios don't have the faith and belief that they should in some of these people, and then they put faith in stuff in other ones, and other people who should not have that faith. David Gordon Green
rush stuff. That's the other problem, is that they just rush stuff.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's the thing. Like,
if you could start things from in studio from day one and just have like things planned out and be like, these are the story beats. And I know things change as they go, but it's like you're going to have a better experience if you're including like the actual CG artists and whatnot at the beginning, rather than just like, you know, hey, we need to rush this scene out. Go find a company that can just rush this right now, you know, or throw this at the third party that we're already using and abusing, you know.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's crazy to me, and like obviously you and I are very big fans of movies. Have been for a while, but it's weird to me to see like the overall letdown. I was gonna say just by the studios, but by fans too, because they're fucking terrible. But when you get like, we always go back to like, we've talked about this before on the podcast. It's not fucking new, but like these studios will go after these creators, these directors, these artists, and then they just don't seem to let them have the control that you would think you would want. Like,
see the one independent film that they did, and it did gangbusters, and people love it. And you're like, cool, do this project that we have, but do it our way. And it's like, but that's not what the people liked about the original thing that you're hiring them for.
You know, and it's and Marvel is obviously like one of the biggest things about it, and DC has its own problems, but Marvel, I mean, several times have literally, I think, picked someone that could make something amazing, but then you're trying to put them in place. Now there are tons of directors that probably could do that, and when I say this, and not saying bad about these directors, like they can do it, but when you hire them to do something and then you start controlling what the art is that they're making, you're defeating the purpose of getting that person. You know, like Edgar Wright is probably one of the best example, right?
It is, yeah.
They came in and he's like, "Hey, we're gonna have you do Ant-Man, right? Cool, awesome. He's great. He's terrific." But then we hear all this stuff about them saying, "Hey, you need to make your movie fit in this, so you have to have this stuff," which, and we've talked about this before, is a terrible idea. Ant-Man should be involved in the bigger story, but his movies should not be affected by what's going to happen later on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Granted, yes, like you can utilize like the quantum realm for things like that, because obviously that came down to the fact of like the whole time travel thing and things like that, right? Awesome. I'm okay with that. But don't make that a plot point for another Ant-Man movie. Don't fucking pigeonhole it for this. Let it do its own thing. Ant-Man has tons of stories you could tell within the Ant-Man world that don't need to be directly affected by the bigger story.
Don't need to be affected by the bigger story and shouldn't necessarily directly affect the bigger story.
Yeah.
Because that's another complaint that I've always had about the Marvel Universe, is that the one that jumps to mind is the Eternals.
Yeah.
You know, where you have this giant Earth thing coming out, you know, this giant creature coming out of the Earth, yet it is not addressed in any other movie ever.
Yeah.
Again, and you would think that it would be like this earth-shattering, shaking thing, you know, that you had this thing come out in the middle of the ocean that could have destroyed the world, but we're never going to talk about it again.
Yeah.
So when you do those smaller movies, they should be their own smaller movie that only affects the characters there. You can have plot points that do carry over, but...
like the giant godlike thing coming out of the Arctic Ocean or wherever it was.
Yeah, shouldn't be something, or if you're going to do it, you need to address it in other movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, with Marvel, not to shit on Marvel, but this is Marvel's big problem to me, is they started small, right? And they grew very big. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
The core set of movies are fantastic, and they led to some amazing stuff. But you, in a way, jumped the shark way too soon for the plans you have or had. But also, if you would have just left that as like that's own thing, and then had these other movies just, hey, this also takes place in the world type thing. But like when you do like the Eternals for a reason, my big problem with that is you have these uber powerful super beings that you have to write into the plot of their movie why they didn't help.
Yeah.
When the biggest problem is they're literally there to make sure Earth isn't affected by these things because they need the population to make the god thing that's being hatched inside the planet. When if they knew this was happening, and they did, they explained it in the movie, why didn't they help stop Thanos?
Because that's a good point. Something I've never even thought of for that particular thing. You're right. They need the population of the world to be a certain size, right?
Yeah.
If I recall right, in order to
the life
bring about
energy,
the birth of this thing.
Yeah.
So when you lose half of humanity, you would think you would want to stop that because it would stop
it would set back your plans.
It would set back your plans for the birth of your celestial. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, you would think that you would kind of want to intervene rather than just go gloves off. Oh, we're not supposed to do anything. Like there's some sort of watcher or something like that.
Yeah, and then
that's a good point. That's another good point that I've never even thought about that movie. Yeah.
And so you have this, right?
Next to the things, yeah.
Yeah, and like so you have all this, right? Like they're just like these super beings that can do all these crazy things, right? Like they have their equivalent of Superman, they have their version of Flash, all that stuff, right? Wonder Woman, blah blah blah. And then you have all that going down, right? And so they're battling themselves, spoiler alert, right? But then in the course of this, you find out that this is happening on other planets throughout the universe, which is also going to be affected by Thanos. So all those other planets that are doing the exact same thing are going to
Sure,
be
yeah.
having the same effect. Why aren't all these copies of these super beings that are out there right now coming together to fight Thanos and his army?
It's a good point.
It's like, bro, also, just as a thing, you could probably use the gauntlet for your own means.
You definitely could.
So, like,
Yeah.
right there, that's the thing. Like, you try to force this into your narrative, right? But also, you're doing it too late.
Yeah.
This should have been something that you did ahead of time, right? But you didn't because you didn't have the money and the popularity. So what you should have done is made its own thing,
Yeah.
because it makes no sense to shove it into this world when it doesn't affect anything but somehow is affected by everything else, and has huge repercussions that you now have to force into your story when you could have just been like, hey, multiverse. You know what I mean? Like, this is somewhere else.
Yeah. This could have been this could have been a Marvel what if.
Yeah, like it should have been. Like, it should be. You know, it's just like, hey, we all already know there's multiverses, right? So why is this happening? Why isn't this happening somewhere else, and not having to affect our big overall story?
Yeah.
It's kind of what they did with Agents of Shield, right? They basically ended up coming at the end saying, "Hey, this isn't the same timeline. This is a different. This is different. This is over here." And a lot of the same players and key points are there because it's essentially, you know, it's still a multiverse. So there's a lot of causology, similarities that go through, and things change. Obviously, for example, Coulson was brought back in this world, but never going forward in the Marvel movies did they ever mention the events that happened in Agents of Shield, and because the fact that it was a different multiverse, so it didn't matter, right? Cool. You should have done the same thing with the Eternals. And then it comes down to the fact, like, I know this is like nitpicky and like people have said it. Why did you do the Black Widow movie after she was already dead?
Yeah, that's pretty dumb.
It's not just that, but like then we already know, like, there's no real, and we've talked about this before on here, there's no real drama buildup in what could happen in the Black Widow movie. Now that we already know that she dies, it doesn't matter anymore. She did all this
because she has to survive to die in another movie.
Yeah, like all this work you did and put into this and story you built with all these characters, literally is just to like
that
move
Black
forward.
The movie was supposed to come out earlier.
Yeah, and they just kept pushing it back for whatever reason. But like, you know how big that movie would have been if it was pre her death, like
probably a lot bigger.
And also, like,
right there when you were at the peak of Marvel making the good movies. Not that a lot of the ones that are coming out are bad movies. I haven't actually seen or had I've slowly realized Mike hit this point a few years ago where he was talking about being fatigued with superhero movies, and to be honest, I realize now I think I'm hitting that point too, because after watching Guardians 3, everything that has come out afterwards, I really haven't cared to want to go see. And I really haven't watched a lot of the stuff on Disney Plus as well. So I think I'm starting to get a bit fatigued as well.
To me, and I understand that. I get it. I understand that could be a thing. What to me, it's less of fatigue for me than more of a, I don't care enough because you're not making solid choices in your storytelling anymore. Like, yeah, they're fun movies. Like Ant-Man and Wasp: Quantumania, or whatever the fuck movie's called, had a lot of fun elements, but it was just so pigeonholed into telling this fucking story to make Kang move forward, which obviously in the real world obviously fucked everyone over, because that version, the actor portraying Kang, can no longer be used because unfortunately Jonathan Majors is, you know, had some legal troubles and apparently is not a good person, but like not as bad as some people, but I'm not going to defend him. Not saying what he did is okay, but it just sucks because like obviously like his career was massive and he was going places, and now it sets a lot of things back. Anyhow, my real problem is the fact that you are still trying to tie everything into this one big thing when you should be making a bunch of fun superhero stuff that has nothing to do with each other than the fact they're set in the same world. Like, Daredevil should never have to be affected by Iron Man. Because Iron Man and Iron Man's foes are holistically, drastically different than what Daredevil's foray is in, right? Now, when it ties to, like, the She-Hulk stuff, that's different. Because they didn't use him. Like, that's the reason you didn't see the Defenders in the Avengers movies, right? Like, what are they going to do against a bunch of space aliens, other than just probably beat some of them up? But they're not super powered for the most part. Yeah, Iron Fist can do it, but they obviously shit the bed with Iron Man and didn't make him, or Iron Fist, and didn't make him what they should have made him. Same with Luke Cage. Like, I don't know why they didn't utilize him more. But then again, it's one of those things where, like, that's part of the problem is they have this and they're trying to make this bigger world when they don't need those people to be part of it. They need to have their own thing, and that's what was great about those is they referenced them, but they didn't need to be affected by them. And having that connection between She-Hulk and even Spider-Man was cool, right? Because, like, Matt Murdock is a lawyer. But when you say, hey, Matt Murdock, let's go fight the Abomination. Nope.
Right.
Nope. That's not good. That's not good for Matt Murdock.
No, not at all.
Because Matt Murdock, yeah, he's got pretty good thing, but if he takes a wallop from the Abomination to his face, it don't matter if he's
just a squishy guy.
Yeah, bro. Dude, it don't matter. He going to be real dead. That sort of thing. Like, you need to stay in your lane, bud. But when it comes to these things, like, DC was, like, and we've said this before, the DCEU was their worst problem they had was the fact they were trying to make a bigger overarching story from the beginning. Second movie really, because the first one, Superman, was its own thing, or Man of Steel.
Man of Steel was its own thing.
It's when they jumped to Batman v Superman. Why? Why did you jump right into that? A team up movie when you should establish your Batman instead of trying to just shove it into one thing.
And it was because they were seeing the success of Marvel at that time with team up movies, and you have arguably two of the biggest superheroes of all time. Why not immediately team them up?
I know why. Because you should have waited to make it more of an impact.
Like, slow burn things a bit more.
Yeah, like, and then your third movie in is the Justice League, where you're gonna throw all of them into one thing, and then never
introduce characters that you haven't even introduced the origin stories for, but then you do the origin stories of them afterwards.
Yeah. And then
but
again, it comes down, So it's just it's to me it's not fatigue. It's like lackluster output. It's like I want to see these things. I love these characters. I've been collecting comic books for a long time.
Yes.
I've read comic books for a long time. I love these characters. I love all the different stories they tell. I want to see some of those, not all of them, on the big screen. I love the fact they adapt Winter Soldier. You know what I mean? That's fucking cool to me. I originally thought that I was going to like the fact that they were using Flashpoint in the Flash movie.
Right.
They shit on that story, but that's neither here nor there. It's the fact that I'm not upset at the adaptation. I'm upset that you're not taking into the fact that these are beloved characters and beloved stories, and you're just trying to make something out of it too quickly without establishing things, and then you're just not following through with it. You know what I mean? Like, just let him, like, don't try to, I mean, obviously not don't crank them out, because that's just terrible, and they need more than that. But obviously, just take your time with them, make them for what they are. Don't try to rush into things. If you have an overarching plan, cool, but that should be its own thing somewhere else. As it started with the whole Marvel thing, right? The big overall tie-in was always an after credit scene, and then for some reason they brought it into the forefront of every movie. When it's like, no, don't. Leave the movies as is, and then tie the characters in an after credit scene or mid credit scene, or however you want to do it, to
I'm fine
building
with
up to it.
Putting things in the movie rather than doing so many after credit scenes.
Oh yeah, don't do like 9 after credit scenes. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying.
But I mean, like, I've always had the argument that I'd rather have the elements that you're going for an overarching story in the actual movie, and not just some afterthought afterwards. That's the one thing that I always liked that DC did, is that at least throughout you would get a sprinkle of like things to come. The biggest example for me was in DC movies was where Barry shows up to Batman and tries to warn him about the future. Obviously, it's not something that happens in the movie as it is, but it is something that will happen in a future movie. I've always liked stuff like that. I don't necessarily need to see this show up as as a credit scene to show me what's going forward. I do like having it more integrated into the movie itself, but the movie itself wasn't about that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, if you're doing that as world building, but what happened later on in Marvel is their movie plot points were literally just tying into what's coming up next versus yes, sprinkle them into the world, right? But obviously, if you're gonna not do that properly, leave it out completely. Like to your fact, like with the fracture in DC was the fact they brought that in, and it never came about. Even in the Justice League movie, when Barry literally goes through, he doesn't go back to that point to where he met with Batman.
Right, which is a flaw that they,
so
it's a flaw.
Don't do that. Do that as
That's
like
because they abandoned that whole entire thing. By that point, they were like, the Flash movie is going to be the last movie that we're going to be able to do. We're not doing Justice League 2 or 3 like Snyder had wanted to do, which would have included all that stuff. Yeah.
So it's just bothering. And that's like I said, it's not really for me. It's not fatigue, right? Like I love this stuff. It's the fact that like a lot of it doesn't matter because you're trying to like the WandaVision stuff, right? WandaVision was setting up a bunch of stuff that literally just ended in one movie and has not been brought up since. And they brought up
exactly like you have a white Vision flying around somewhere, and from that point, you have never addressed it again.
Yep. If he would have showed up in the Doctor Strange movie to help bring down the Scarlet Witch, I would have been more okay with it.
Right.
Also,
bringing it. You have a thread that's out there, and that would have tied that thread, together to something else. But instead, it's just hanging in the wind. Right now.
It's just something that's. Oh, we'll come back to that later. It's like you set up all of this in the WandaVision show for Wanda to be the big bad in this movie, right? Mm-hmm. But then she's also her own, like, demise. Mm-hmm. But why did you set up all that stuff in the WandaVision show? That then makes no difference. And obviously, and the other thing too is with the whole Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness thing, that had nothing to do with Doctor Strange for the most part. It was more of just how Wanda was falling apart.
Yeah.
And it took in the Doctor Strange thing took a back seat in a way that like shouldn't have been. I don't know. It was weird. It's just like they're trying to do too many things without actually doing too many things. Mm-hmm. And in like in Star Wars, for example, like they're doing a really good job, if you ask me, about keeping their kind of stuff separated, but like still in the major world, right? Like the stuff that happens in Ahsoka doesn't really affect the Mandalorian, other than the fact that like she was in it, right? But then that was just their way of introducing Ahsoka to the live action, so that we get to where we're going. But her story in the show Ahsoka had nothing to do with the Mandalorian as of yet. Right. I mean, obviously Thrawn being a big thing is very bad for everybody, but it wasn't utilizing the Ahsoka show to push forward season 4 of the Mandalorian.
Right.
It was just expanding on the universe. No pun intended. Same thing with like in the I don't know if you probably haven't watched Andor, but Andor,
like 1 or 2 episodes of Andor,
is really good. Obviously, it sucks because we know what happens to him, but it's cool to see where he was to get to where we saw him.
And it's also a different type of show. I mean, like I said, I've only watched like the first 1 or 2 episodes, but it felt more like a spy show rather than a straight up action adventure Star Wars show.
Yeah, and to the greatest point that Star Wars has done all their shows have had their own look and feel. I mean, obviously the same universe, but like they visually look different and they're shot differently and they're done especially well. Like obviously Mandalorian's very westerny.
Oh yeah.
Ahsoka's very samurai-y in a lot of aspects. And then Andor's very spy-like. And then you have like the Skeleton Crew coming up with fucking Dumbledore in it, and that's more of like a war-ish type movie, like a Rebels type thing. I mean, you have obviously Rebels the show. You have the Bad Batch, which is a whole different thing, and they're all in the same world, but they're not overly affecting each other in a way where like it's fun to watch them, and you can watch them separately. Like you don't have to watch anything that happens outside of the Mandalorian if you don't want to, because those aren't affecting where those are going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Ahsoka being in one episode doesn't make it or break it. It just, and they tell their own story that's in it, and it's like this own encapsulated thing within the Mandalorian world, but Mandalorian continues on its own story. Versus having like, oh, now wait, let's step on the story, let's go over to Ahsoka, do that, and then that's gonna later affect what we see. No, it's not how this works. But like with the Marvel stuff, a lot of it is just like, other than Loki, which is literally the whole story of that is the multiverse, so that makes sense to why it's tied in so much. But even that, in its own right, is still separated from everything else. It's telling its own story within that, but not having to worry about effects, because they lean into the whole multiverse of what's happening in Spider-Man, which obviously was a huge thing because like that was a multiverse story, the last one, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm getting. It's not fatigue to me. It's the lack of continuity, but also the lack of just overall satisfying. Hey, I want to watch this. It's always about what we going to do to tie this into the next big thing, where it shouldn't be.
Greater. Yeah.
So
that makes me wonder, like, because I know they're doing the Blade movie, like, how's that going to be? Because that would be one movie that I would be anticipating a little bit, because it is supposed to be I think a rated R Marvel movie.
Yeah.
But it also now makes me worried, like, how are they going to pigeonhole it into the greater universe?
Well, the nice thing about it is the only thing they pigeonhole it into is the Eternals, and apparently the Eternals is shuttered now, so we don't have to worry about how that's
the actual movie itself. Like, yeah, they introduced the Blade into the Eternals with the Eternals, but like when they actually come out with the movie, how is that going to be?
That's what I'm saying. Is now we're not worried about that because he's not going to have to tie it to like Eternals 2. It can do its own thing, but your point is,
what are they going to do to tie it to the rest of the world? Is my saying.
I mean, hopefully nothing.
I'm sure that they will. So what is that going to be? What is that going to look like?
I just hope it's more of like, hey, let's mention that this is a thing that's happening over here, but like let's let our story kind of be here.
Just our own story.
Like it's, hey, this is the world we're in, right? But like he's over here fighting vampires. Let's not worry about fucking
exactly. That's what I'm
else.
hoping.
Yeah.
That is what I'm hoping.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, in a way I'm like, oh, I'm excited to see what they do with it, but also like terrified of what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah.
You know, so we'll see. And then like the same thing was like, I'm mildly curious about Fantastic Four, but I'm also at this point thinking, nah, like.
My problem with Fantastic Four is it sounds like they're not going to bring John Krasinski back for
well, I mean that's
Mr. Fantastic, and like I get the whole multiverse thing, but it's still like you had a perfect
you have perfect casting
for that, so why not just carry it over? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's wild to me that they.
I mean, maybe behind the scenes thing, maybe he just didn't have the time to do that because he is doing other stuff, which I get, but still.
Yeah.
You had perfect casting. Why couldn't you have just promised it back then so that you could lock him down for other stuff?
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Anyway.
But yeah. Boom. Yeah, so I think we'll wrap it up there with our discussion about random stuff that actually kind of stayed in one real thing. I'm proud of us.
Yeah. Right.
We can go on some fucking, oh, by the way, speaking of, and then go on some fucking thing about sea turtles.
Right.
Because that's what happens.
Yeah.
Anyways, so that's it for this week's episode of Comes Naturally. We have been
Joe.
I have been Cody, and as usual, you fuckers just came naturally.
Bye.